The second that you get an individual focusing on the important things that aren't time sensitive, it requires a certain level of dedication and perspective from them that can be quite uncomfortable sometimes because you have to actively prioritize something and there's these ringing bells on the other side constantly going at you and you feel like you're doing something wrong.
Welcome to Conversations with. On this show, my guests and I explore the bumps and triumphs of their journey to extract the gems from their experiences because success leaves clues, and today we turn those clues into billboards for you. I'm your host, Gene Bernier, founder of Peeled Back, speaker and co-active coach, guiding leaders to pursue a life worth living. Hey everybody, we're here today with Ester Pike, an expert in occupational psychology and the CEO of Fledged Solutions. Today, we'll explore Esther's journey, the challenges she's overcome, and the insights she's gained on the road to shaping the future of workplace culture. Esther, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So, occupational psychology, workplace culture, where did all this desire to make this kind of impact start from?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I can answer that with two separate journeys. One was the way that my career led, and the second one was academically how I ended up navigating that whole piece of
Let's
my
do them
life.
both. All
Both
right.
went in parallel chronologically. When I first started working here in the Okanagan, in a previous life, I was a forklift driver, and you had somebody on your show recently, Kara Heck, who was one of my first employers. Looking back on it now, it was one of the best experiences that I could have had. It was where I got my feet wet with things like leadership, like company culture, what it means to grow, what it means to evolve, what it means to lead people, especially in difficult situations. It was very customer service based. The job was quite difficult at times. I didn't realize at the time just how much of an education I was getting in real time of what running a
Wow.
good organization looks like.
It's interesting the contrast you share that now that you look back on it and see the education that you got through it, do you have memories of what it was like while you were going through that experience and with your first job? So being in it, comparing to where you are now, looking back, wow, what an education.
So when I first started, after the first 2 or 3 weeks, I wanted to quit. I was not it was so difficult. I found it extremely difficult. The customers wouldn't really treat us very well. The job itself was quite difficult, and I didn't wanna keep going. It was not an easy time for me. My mom, bless her, she says, like, "Yeah, you can quit, of course, you can always quit, but if you learn to quit now, then you're gonna quit forever." And
Oh, mom.
and she knew me very well, and the stubborn part of me kept going, and it kept going for 6 years. I didn't realize it at the time, not having that level of experience yet, not quite understanding the repercussions of my actions and how I should be approaching things in a more adult-like manner, and I'm sure Kara can probably speak to that more than I can. But I didn't realize just how much I was evolving and how much I was changing as a person in order to make sure that I had success in this, little part of what I was doing. One of the things that I'm really happy about is that I always did take my job very seriously.
Was that something that came natural to you, or was that part of your family culture?
Yeah, I think it was definitely highly influenced by my upbringing quite a bit. So I was actually homeschooled from the 5th grade onward. And I know that sometimes it can come with a little bit of a taboo perspective, depending on people's experiences of what that looks like. But for me, it looked like 24/7 learning, and it looked like there's no summer breaks. You don't take a break in the summer. Summer is, you keep going. It looked like a mixture of, BC and Alberta and a bit of European curriculum. So, on the family side with my mom really driving a lot of my education and the habits, she instilled in me from an early age that learning was just a part of life. It wasn't something that you just get over and done with. It was something that you should really try to integrate into your day-to-day life. And I think that served me really well when I started working because it was that tenacity and that perspective of I can always do better. I can always learn something. I can always try to learn from my mistakes. That really kept me
Right.
going quite a bit.
That's a lot of that the mic drop moment right away here is figuring out at that young age that learning isn't something you just get through. It's this process. And you use the word integrate and how you're going to integrate all those experiences along the way to make this evolution that you pointed to earlier really come to life is like that's a deep learning to have
Yeah.
and to be able to look back on that and say, hey, learning is an integrative process.
Mhm.
I'm never done learning.
Yes, absolutely. And it's what got me through my formal education as well. For 7 years straight, I was doing full-time work in university schooling between my bachelor's and my master's degrees. Go to work at 8 a.m., finish up around 4, go home, eat, maybe do a little bit of gym, and then study from 5 or 6 p.m. all the way until sometimes 1, 2 in the morning. And that was my life for a really long time. And I'm not saying that it doesn't come with sacrifices, but what I got out of that was a practice that I can now take with me whenever is necessary. It's something that I can pull out of my toolbox as to, how much I can push myself. And there were so many times, both on the education front and on the job front, where I wanted to give up, but just couldn't allow myself to cross that threshold because then all of this effort that I put into it up to that point would have been for nothing.
When you find yourself up to that threshold, what's that conversation like with yourself? Are there questions that you're bringing up,
Yeah.
stories that you're competing against at those points?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think also I was very lucky and fortunate is to have chosen psychology as my main focus educationally while I was going through this process. So while I was going through the emotional and psychological trials of what it means to push yourself to that extent, I was also learning about what happens to people when they're under pressure. So I was almost able to take a step back and understand that these responses I was having and the struggles that I was experiencing, the second that you understand the reason for the things that you are feeling, they do become easier to manage. I always think that
Mm.
feelings in and of themselves aren't necessarily a negative. Feelings are always indicative of something. Now, the question is, how
Yes.
well are you able to dissect and understand where they're coming from and why, whether it's something internal or external, how you're supposed to react to them? So, having that capacity to take a step back and observe yourself as objectively as possible, because we're always going to have biases, but as objectively as possible
Yeah.
is critical in every facet of life.
Oh, there's so much to unpack with that first step of saying like emotions are neither good nor bad.
Hmm.
They just are. They're a messenger
Hmm.
and they're trying to tell a story or they're trying to get our attention. What I hear though is that you are in this process of going through learning about the mechanisms of our mind and how our emotions all work while also experiencing all that. It's like you were living your own case study going, huh, what's happening here?
Yeah.
What have I learned and how do I now integrate this into kind of pulling myself apart from going, I'm watching me have this experience. That's different.
Yes, and I laugh because I don't want there to be any sort of false pretenses like I was doing it well all the time. You reminded me of a moment when I was finishing my final essay for a semester on circadian rhythms and the importance of sleep, doing espresso shots at 2 a.m., doing the exact opposite of what I was writing in there as being suggested good practice for what it means to have a natural sleep cycle. So I laugh at it because sometimes you consciously are aware that you are not doing what you should be doing.
And literally, as you're writing
Yeah.
it, be like, good sleep equals health, blah, blah, blah. Another espresso shot, 2 in the morning, not quite done, gotta go. And that speak back to like that push and like there's like a push and pull. I know what's best, and yet I also have this toolbox that I can push when I need to.
Mhm.
What do you learn as you're going through like the push and pull going like sometimes I'm going to have to go really hard, but yet there's also a pull back to going there's another side to this as well, and what do we
Absolutely.
and not to get stuck in either one of those states.
Absolutely. So, I first had to learn how to push, and then I got so good at it that I didn't know how to stop. Once I
Mm,
finished university and I had all of this quote unquote free time, I found myself struggling not to fill up my calendar with random busyness. It felt natural. I almost felt a bit of guilt if I didn't have something booked for a day. And it was something that, my family, my mom, my close friends around me would every once in a while point out and say, "Hey, I was always known as the girl who burns the candle at both ends." And it's not something that I would necessarily suggest as being the status quo. So thankfully, I like to think that I've gotten better at it. Thankfully, it's something that I can pull out when needed, but it is not the state that I would ever consider to be the healthy place to be for a prolonged period of time. There's times to push,
Mhm.
but there's also such a massive necessity in being able to pull back and slow down.
Yeah, I hope everyone re-listens to that part. Identifying when that push is coming, and it's okay to burn candles at both ends for a short period of time.
Yeah.
That's like a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, because it does have adverse effects. Even hearing from you saying you didn't know how to turn it off. What's life like without this? And now that becomes incredibly in this place of uncomfort, going, I don't know how to operate here.
Yeah.
Learning, help me out.
Absolutely. Yes, and it's something that I also see in organizations to a certain extent. So with my particular field with occupational or business psychology, it's organizational behavior. It's everything to do with the people side of your business. And I always like to think of organizations as organisms, right? You have a body
Mm.
with all of these various different components and organs, and my job is to go in there like a doctor. You tell me what your symptoms are, and I'm not going to give you a band aid solution. I'm going to try to figure out exactly what is going on and what may be wrong. And a lot of businesses, quite like a lot of people, do like to Google their symptoms and try to see what the, everything's cancer. Same way that, everything is, I don't know, authentic leadership, right? So there's always that kind of analogy that I like to place on it. But this concept of not being able to stop, I see organizations doing it sometimes as well, to the point where they are so locked into the concept of growth and opportunity that they haven't taken a step back to make sure that the foundational aspects of it, such as the capacity and structure, ability of people to actually have the tools, resources, and energy to get on board with this opportunity, just aren't there. And people do that individually as well as on the business front.
Especially as a leader in those types of organizations, there's a bit of a cultural like, let's hustle, let's grind. We've got to be better all the time.
Mhm.
We're not robots. We're not made to go 24/7. And yet we are highly relational. How do we actually work as a team? How do we create these foundations? How do you work with people to identify going, hey, this isn't actually a good thing? And how do you want to be? And taking them through that journey of exploring that. Maybe they've been on for so long, they don't know how to be any other way. They just know, I think something's wrong.
Yes, absolutely. One of the most difficult parts of my field is helping people understand that they need me a lot sooner than they think. So most often what I
Mm,
get is organizations coming to me when things have gone so bad that they're almost desperate from some sort of change. And unfortunately at that point there's always going to be some collateral damage to things like your culture, the level of trust, the revolving door of employees coming in and out of your organization. Now you have a reputation of not being the best business. So, or the best employer. So there's a lot that happens that are usually signs that I should be contacted a lot sooner. But even for the organizations that I can come in and help, there's two components really to it. On the one side, there's the educational factor, framing the information and the perspective in such a way that will actually resonate with the individuals who have been hardwired
right.
to go in a certain way for so long. But I always want to make sure that there is a strong emphasis on the implementation. And that's something that I feel is missing. It's kind of like the self help of business sometimes when you go to all of these seminars and you attend all of these workshops or you pay enormous amounts of money for these strategic retreats. Um, and commonly, what I get back is a lot of individuals saying, "We've done all these things, but nothing changes when I come back in the office on Monday morning." And that's where I like to focus pretty heavily on is, okay, I can give you the training and information, but the work doesn't happen here while we're talking. The work happens in between. I'm here to teach, so to speak.
Right. And Yes, there's one thing about taking people out of their environment, giving them some trainings, and then tossing them back into that same environment going, "Cool, we did the thing. Is everybody better now?"
Yeah.
Be like, "No, you actually have to start implementing the change, and implementing change is painful. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. The pain of change does not care about the size. Here's what we learned on the weekend.
Mhm.
Let's try to figure this out." And that can be scary because that culture and environment has a set of norms, and you're gonna break that cycle. And it's like, well, how do we do that as a group? It's gonna take a dedicated and intentional effort
Mhm.
to make that change. So how do you start to lead people in going, "What did we notice?" How do you then take them saying, "We've identified there's a thing. Now we actually have to go stand in it and clean this up."
Yes. So oftentimes what I get is leaders of an organization coming to me saying, as an example, I'm having a lot of trouble with getting my team on board and having them work cohesively. I don't feel like the engagement is very high. I feel like the culture has lost something, especially post pandemic. We really struggled, and I'm struggling to get it back to where it was. So I need you to come in and help me with them. And I will, absolutely, because there is a certain amount of work that you need to do with that particular level in order to see change. But one of the first questions I ask is, what is one thing that you are committed to do to change in yourself as a leader in order to help the people that you are looking to affect change? And it goes back to essentially this one very, you know, it's something that I learned very early on with regards to communication is if you don't like the answer that you receive, then that means you need to change your line of questioning. It comes back to you. And that's something that I really, really focus on is how to ensure that within that relationship, which is often riddled with broken trust, how do I ensure that both sides do see that everybody is making an effort and facing the same direction?
That can be a heavy, heavy space. And even just asking that question
Oh,
of what are you willing to commit to? That lands in a heavy spot, especially when the leader's like, there's something wrong with them. What are they doing as they're pointing outwards
yes.
and forgetting they've got three fingers pointing back at them,
Yeah.
going, what are you willing to do this? You are the top, you're the CEO. The buck stops with you.
Yes.
If you don't like what you see, what are you willing to change? How are you willing to be part of this?
Absolutely. One of the key habits is this martyrdom to busyness, and I see leaders fall into it. It's this concept of there's almost like a little bit of a superhero complex that I see with high achievers of doing the things that are highly important. They're very important. I need to get them done right now. And it's the time and importance factor. They need to get done very quickly. There's a deadline and they're very important tasks. And a lot of leaders and high achieving people stay in that zone. But what I have to help them do is get out of that zone and into the true place where change happens, where they're focusing on the things that are important but are not very time constrained. The things that you can put off all the time because that's the working on your business
Yeah.
focus that is often missing because we continuously get distracted. Well, I must be doing the right thing. I must be doing the things that are important, obviously, because it's so time sensitive and critical to my business. This is where I need to spend most of my time. As a leader, it's not that at all. You delegate those things to the rest of your team to do. What you need to focus on are the things that are critically important to your organization, but that you have the choice of putting off to tomorrow, next week, next month, and never end up doing.
Preach is like the badge of busyness, right?
Yes.
We're not beavers anymore. We don't need to be collecting all the
Yeah.
badges. This concept of important and urgent
Yes.
is where your energy can go. On the surface, you're doing things
Hmm.
like a duck in a river trying to swim upstream. Feet are going, making no actual impact on where it's hoping to go.
Yes.
What I hear is within all this is like when you start to pull people back from that and go, let's, what would happen if we pulled the urgent stuff out and gave that away? What is that one thing you wish you had the time to change right now? What's the one thing you want to commit to? What's the one wish you have for this company
Hmm.
that you're not acting on?
Yes.
That's a lot of space to start to get comfortable with.
Yes. It's sometimes quite scary for leaders staying in that important and time sensitive zone is frustrating because they can sense that something's not getting done. There isn't progress in the way they were envisioning. But the second that you get an individual focusing on the important things that aren't time sensitive, it requires a certain level of dedication and perspective from them that can be quite uncomfortable sometimes because you have to actively prioritize something, and there's these ringing bells on the other side constantly going at you, and you feel like you're doing something wrong because you're not focusing, and you think it's, oh, this is the fluffy stuff, this isn't going to do anything. And it's funny because the fluffy stuff is actually quite important in terms of that perspective.
Cool. Yeah. Every time I work with a client, we pull them into that place. What's that space in your company you wish you had the time to spend? It should be, but you never prioritize. It's always within a month they look back and go, "Oh, wow, things are already different." 3 months, I've just landed my next new client, or I've just developed this process that we've been putting off for years. My whole team's acting differently. Like it doesn't take long, and it is very uncomfortable at that start. Doing something new is scary, but I think what it'd be interesting to see is it the doing something new that's scary, or is it having to evaluate who you are to this business and what does that then mean about your own personal identity?
100%. There's this concept of having to not just do the motions and go through the actions, but actually being the individual that you need to be in order to make the decisions that you need to do in order to have the things that you want to have. So there's always multiple aspects to that, and people often forget. They think, give me the tools and tell me what to do and it'll get better. But it's not enough because those
No.
decisions and habits are not going to get ingrained into your decision making process unless you ask yourself the hard questions of, who do I need to become in order to be capable of making these kinds of decisions in the future. The last thing that I want to do is give them a solution. They apply it. That's great, works in that moment, but they're incapable of understanding how to kind of reverse that formula and apply it to the next challenge and situation that comes in. So that's where we focus on quite a lot is, okay, who do you need to become first before you can start
Right.
putting these things into place?
Oh, yes. When you talk about who you're going to be, there was no word of doing
Yes.
in there. And that's a different operating system
Mhm.
to go from, and to like strip the what I'm not what I do anymore. Be like, no, you're who you're gonna be, and like how are you gonna face the challenges? How are you gonna lead in these spaces? How are you gonna choose to show up? Values and things that felt fluffy at one point all of a sudden become this real like hard set of like, I can trust these when solutions are being brought in, like you say, they stick. It's not taking just a horse to the water. You'd be like, you're teaching them how to fish and survive. Oh,
Yes. I think that one of my happiest moments every time when I'm working is when I see a client switch from having a fear of being in that space to having excitement around it, because the idea of changing who you are can be very scary to people. But once it clicks in, this understanding that you as an individual have a choice of what that looks like, your capacity to see opportunities and what your success can look like in the future expands because you're no longer limited to this set of descriptions that you've given yourself of who you are and your limitations. And, I can only reach this level of success. The individual realizes it's not so much about me losing sight of who I am, it's me understanding that I actually have a lot more control and power over what that looks like than I originally thought.
right. And just brings it right back to this place of empowered.
Mhm,
Now they can be at this place to like, I'm ready to do something about it. Which means I'm going to do differently
mhm.
and accepting that maybe that different isn't a whole lot, maybe 1, 2 degrees different than what they were doing before. But the way that they're now operating from that place of empowered really drives it in a whole new way.
Absolutely, and now imagine having an entire team who's functioning at that level, right? And what level of,
Mhm.
success and trust you can actually cultivate by ensuring that there's alignment in personally first within yourself, and then afterwards with the rest of the team, the people that you're leading and the people that you work for.
Right. And there's this idea of like, you're going to model it and they're going to they're going to catch it actually a lot more than if you were just to preach and talk to them about it. Be like, why are we hitting our scores? Why, why is our psychological safety low?
Yeah.
And you're acting like a bull in a china
Yeah.
shop versus coming back into it and going, hey, actually, it's okay to have some risk. It's okay that
Mhm.
we've taken these opportunities to learn because failure is inherent part of us learning and trying new things and stretching and you show up different, which then starts to change the pH of the pool that everybody's in.
I like to give the analogy of a sandbox. So, what you're aiming for is a loose but strict culture. The sand inside allows every individual to have some sort of individuality, some sort of autonomy, some sort of capacity to be able to make decisions. But it's always within the confines of the box. And the clearer that you can get over what the purpose of your business is, how you would like to do business, what the values are that you are going to utilize in making those decisions, what your mission and vision is. The strategic planning process isn't something you go through once a year or once every 3 years and you set your targets and you make your goals and then you stick it on the top of your shelf somewhere and never look at it. It is meant to be a reminder of a guiding point of how you are going to be making every single decision every single day, from your recruitment practices, from whether you're going to be taking on new opportunities or not. It's really critical that we actually integrate that into the everyday process. And that's what I mean when I
Yes.
talk about the confines of the box. You have to set a target, but you also need to then be able to let go. I like the analogy of leadership of, there's management, which is pushing, and leadership, which is pulling. When you look at kind of the visual diagram of what it is, it's you setting a direction and then getting out of the way. Because otherwise, your team can only go as fast as you. You are now setting the pace. And that's not really going to
Mm.
work for a very long time either. What you want is to set a direction, get out of the way, and create a vacuum of opportunity for your team to fill in whatever way, shape, or form they find fit. Now you can accelerate. Now you got an entire team who's working for this, not just you.
Oh, and that in itself is like pulling yourself out of that superhero seat is like your role as that leader, as the CEO or department head is set the goal and then constantly be like, is everyone pointing to the same
Yes.
goal? Yes, cool. Are there roadblocks? I remove roadblocks, but I'm definitely not in that race. I'm on the edge
Yes.
watching all of you do your thing and going, "Oh, we've got a straggler. What's happening back here?
Yes.
Let's get you pointed in the right way.
Exactly.
Are you in the right seat?" That's ties it back to as a leader, you're hiring much smarter people to do the things that you've identified that need to be done, but your job is to set it and then help them clear all the roadblocks so they can be in their genius.
100%. 100%. And there's this fear sometimes that I see of redundancy. If I'm surrounded by a team that is smarter than me, then what is the purpose of me? Leadership isn't about having all of the answers. Leadership is about collectively bringing together a group of people who can find the best solution. You're just the glue that holds things together. You're not the solution provider.
Yeah.
That's what you have a team for.
Yeah, and you're there. Part of that is also taking that responsibility as the leaders. Like, not everybody wants to go, "Is this our North Star?" Somebody has to go, "That's where we're going."
Yes.
And getting everybody rounded up and going, "We're going on an adventure. This is gonna be fun."
Yeah.
Maybe, but we're gonna find out together and we'll get there together, right? And like
Exactly.
that's that I love that metaphor of like you are the glue that holds them
Yes.
together. You're not there to do the solutions. You're not there to be the smartest person in the room. If you are, you've hired incorrectly to begin with. And and this isn't about maybe it is about your ego right now, but you could become the leader that makes it about getting to the fulfilling on your mission.
Yes, yes, absolutely. A lot of leadership is about understanding your team very well, understanding where their strengths lie, understanding what their motivations are, understanding their behavioral profiles. One of the key critical things that I also utilize in a lot of what I do. I have a extra license in psychometric assessments, so everything from attitude, aptitude, personality, skill set, all of those things. And one of the things, oddly enough, that I don't like is when it's used as a method of almost typecasting individuals, right? Oh, I fall into one of
Mhm.
these, 16 Myers Briggs personality, your definition. And I find that sometimes if it's not applied properly, it turns into an excuse for behavior. I am a, gold, so therefore I only deal with the strategy of it. Your job as green is to implement. There's all sorts of things that I
Right.
see like that. So I'm very, very careful of exactly how and when I implement those psychometric assessments. They end up being this common language that we can now refer back to in order to help understand the differences in behavior or motivation that we see within each other as
Right.
teams, as leaders. And all of a sudden, it starts making more sense and it's not so personal. And you kind of start realizing, okay, yeah, I guess you wouldn't do it the way that I would, but that's probably a good idea because in certain situations, my way probably wouldn't be the best. And that's where you also
Right.
find a lot of cohesion and trust in each other despite differences.
Yes, and being able to use that tool to build a team vocabulary or
Yes,
a team language is like, now we can speak the same language. Now we're not tripping over each other so much, and that just helps that alignment tighten up even more and more as I imagine what happens when everyone's speaking the same language, utilizing their own innate gifts and skills they bring to the table.
exactly. Exactly. 100%.
Wow, Esther, this was an incredible conversation. Tell everybody about where they can find you and who's the right kind of client to come
Ooh,
talk to Esther.
yes. But you can find me at fledged.ca. So my company, Fledged Solutions Incorporated. That's probably the best way to start. You can get an understanding of what occupational psychology is and the ways that I can help. It's an easy way to contact me. I love coffee. So first conversations, first consultations, first diagnostics are always free because I prefer that people get a little bit more of an understanding and a feel of what interactions with me would be like before committing to anything, and I just like meeting people too, so it's kinda nice. My ideal client, honestly, it's it's always the client who understands that the work needs to happen in between the sessions. When you hire a personal trainer, you don't expect them to get on the treadmill for you in order for you to lose weight. So, usually businesses and clients who are understanding of that and aware of the fact that I can give you all of the tools, but I can't do the work for you, those are usually the ones that I can work with easiest. I don't think any problem is unsolvable. That's my perspective.
I love that. All right, thank you. And everything else will be in the show notes below to connect with Esther. If anything she said today has resonated, definitely reach out to her. Before I let you go, Esther, we're going to jump into my time machine. We're going to head 10 years into the future. When that door opens, what is she saying thank you to you for?
Whoa. Okay, 10 years in the future. I would say thank you for taking the risk. I am quite risk adverse and conservative in nature. And one of the things that I have really pushed myself into doing is taking the leaps and not getting into that analysis paralysis. Even something as simple as launching myself into this career so early on is something that I think probably 10 years in the future, I'm going to be really grateful to myself for is putting myself in those difficult situations and uncomfortable situations. I would say that.
Thank you very much. I look forward to connecting with you in 10 years to see how that continues to unfold. For everybody else, take the risks and step into that discomfort like Esther is talking about today. Until next time, my name is Gene, and this has been episode with Esther Pike. We'll talk to you all next time.
Right.
Oh, one last thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals.